Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're dialing in from. I see numbers going up. Thank you so much for joining us today. See numbers are still rising. Yeah, thank you all so much for joining and welcome to this UN Digital Community webinar. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, which UN entity you're from, or which external organization. And if you'd like to make things a little bit more interesting, let us know what is the digital tool that you couldn't live without. While you do all that, let me just quickly share that we're recording this event and we'll make it available so that you can access it later and share it with colleagues who couldn't make it today. And as you're introducing yourself, let me introduce myself. I'm Julia. I'm leading this community of colleagues from the UN system interested in digital. And for some of our events, we are also opening it up to external participants, and we're welcoming in external perspectives. Yeah, I would like to just, I see everyone is already sharing where they're from. Thank you so much. Great to have you all here. I don't see that many tools yet. Oh, actually, yeah, a procurement tool. That seems to be organization internal. Yeah, keep them coming. Thank you so much for joining. Before we start, I want to give you a brief reminder of what the context of this UN digital community is before we head into the context of today's event. So just briefly, we come together in this UN digital community because it is one of the priority areas of the UN 2.0 vision that is all about building the expertise and the culture that we need to better serve member states in the 21st century. And for that, we want to bring together digital because it is one of the priority areas of the vision alongside other capabilities like data innovation, foresight, behavioral science, and all of that is supported by forward-thinking culture. And the UN digital community is the newest of these UN 2.0 communities, just formed this summer, and they are to complete this group of UN 2.0 communities. The UN Innovation Network, for example, just did a webinar on kind of like the basics of open source. You'll find the link to that in the chat if after the session you feel like you want to go back to the basics. And if you're interested to learn more about data, for example, you can join a webinar hosted by the UN Data Community tomorrow on the Data to Policy Navigator. We'll also make sure that the link to that is in the chat. With this UN digital community, what we're offering is a set of knowledge event like this one, but also a networking opportunity and just a platform to share resources and your work in digital from within the UN. And like I said, we're open for some of the offers externally as well. In case that this event has been forwarded to you and you're not a member of the UN digital community yet, we'll put the link to join in the chat so that you do not miss out on any communication or any offers in the future. Like the ones that we've got presented here. And if you have any questions or suggestions, input, feel free to reach out to us via digital@un.org. And so now that I gave this little recap, I want us to get started on today's agenda and introduce to you the fantastic speakers that we've got for today's session on digital public goods and AI democratization. We are super happy to welcome Lea Gimpel from the Digital Public Goods Alliance. She is Director of AI and Country Engagement and will give us an intro to digital public goods and then talk more about the potential of AI within that context. And to make things a bit more practical, we're excited to have Lea Gachara with us. He is a technical advisor at GIZ's Fair Forward Initiative. And he will share some of the insights from his work in Kenya, where they're implementing open source AI use cases. So I thank you both so much for shaping today's session. And now, without any further introduction, I would like to hand over to Lea from DPGA. Yeah, thank you so much for being here, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for this introduction. And hello, everyone, also from my side. I'm really happy to see so many people joining for today's session, which proves that there's a lot of interest in open source AI and digital public goods. At least that's what I hope for. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Firstly, let's look at AI democratization and the Sustainable Development Goals. If you look at the track record of achieving the SDGs, we know that we are somewhere behind. And according to a UN estimation, around 70% of the SDGs can rely on digital solutions to help achievement. And obviously, as part of these digital solutions, AI systems can play a key role. If they are available, if they can be developed locally, benefit communities, and are governed inclusively. So to democratize AI, to make all of this happen, we need digital public goods. They're really essential, and I will explain you why in the next few minutes. The origins of the digital public goods definition comes also from the UN. So although I'm an external party to this webinar, I actually feel quite closely to the United Nations. Because back in 2019 and 2020, through the UN High-Level Roadmap for Digital Cooperation, also the term of digital public goods was coined by the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, who said that digital public goods are open source software, open data, open AI models, open standards, and open content. And these digital public goods have in common that they are SDG relevant, that they adhere to privacy and other applicable laws and best practices, and that they do no harm by design. And based on the high-level roadmap for digital cooperation, that was also the founding reason for the Digital Public Goods Alliance, to help the discoverability of digital public goods, the investments, and the implementation of digital public goods in partner countries worldwide. So in a nutshell, digital public goods are open AI systems, open software, open data, and open content. And as I said, what they all have in common is that they advance the Sustainable Development Goals, they are open source, and they do no harm. And at the Digital Public Goods Alliance, we operationalize these three core components through the so-called DPG standard. That is a standard of 9 indicators, which we use to assess products, whether they are adhering to these core components. The standard includes, for instance, of course, relevance to the SDGs as the first part, a do no harm by design approach, which was also mentioned, but also things like good enough documentation so that others can actually use and build on top of this open source product, clear ownership, and of course, adherence to privacy and other applicable laws, and a few other aspects as well. And every product that gets the DPG recognition is then also listed on the DPG registry, which is on our website, where basically everyone can browse the recognized DPGs, find links to the GitHub repositories, and can start building and using these products in these different categories. So let's talk quickly about the benefits of open source AI, because I think that's important if we look at SDG attainment. Firstly, open source AI provides information that is essential for auditing systems and to mitigate bias. It can ensure accountability and transparency of AI components, and can also accelerate AI research, including AI safety research. So a lot of the progress that we've seen in recent years in the AI field is actually due to a really open research agenda, because many researchers shared what they have been developing, and this accelerated the speed of innovation as well in this field. Open source AI also addresses market concentration by making models available to others. It spurs innovation because everyone can take such a model and build on top of it or fine-tune it. And it also increases quality because there's increased competition and tackles AI monoculture. And AI monoculture basically refers to the fact that a lot of the at least leading AI models are currently coming from the same geographies, with the same values baked in, more or less developed by the same people. So open source AI can actually enable everyone to develop their own models and thus also break this monoculture and bring more diversity to how AI models are developed and what they are doing, which values they are reflecting, and so on and so forth. And lastly, of course, they are also a foundation for context-specific application development. So open source AI gives developers access to resources which are crucial for developing context-specific localized applications that can address, for instance, market gaps and market failures. So they could address issues where big tech doesn't go in because there's just no market for big tech in it, and which are representative of cultural and linguistic diversity and allow for model alignment with different value systems. So in a nutshell, open source in AI is essential for democratizing these powerful technologies, and at different levels also. In the use of AI, it helps to democratize AI development, it helps to democratize AI benefits, and it also helps to democratize AI governance. Of course, making development resources accessible is not enough to tackle all of these 4 dimensions, but it's an essential part to ensuring that everyone can benefit from AI technology. And to tackle the other aspects, such as governance, for instance, it's also important to note that we need to go beyond this technical perspective and need to embrace coalition building and community-based approaches. So for instance, working with communities and civil society actors that are not traditionally rooted in tech or in open source, but that are, for instance, democracy activists or activists that stand for inclusiveness and make sure that societies actually embrace a diversity of people. So when we come to open source AI, we also realize that it's currently not well defined, and that there's a lot of confusion and open washing around the term. Open washing basically refers to the fact that someone is claiming that something is open source, but it's actually not. So for instance, Meta's Llama 2 and Llama 3 model are supposedly, according to the company, open source. But if you look at the open source definition or what open source constitutes, it's actually not. And the Open Source Initiative, OSI, is the custodian of the open source definition for software. And they're also currently developing an open source AI definition. And say that an open source AI is an AI system made available under terms that grants the freedoms to use, study, modify, and share the system without any restrictions. So if you've taken the introduction to open source that Julia mentioned, you might recognize that these 4 freedoms are the foundation to free software and open software. And they are also the foundation for open source AI. And at the Digital Public Goods Alliance, we've been busy with defining the term for us as well and seeing how to update the DPG standard to fit the AI category and better. So what we did is that we co-convened with UNICEF, a community of practice of experts from the AI and openness field to develop non-binding recommendations for an update of the DPG standard. And obviously there's a governance process behind, so the DPG Standard Council will look at these recommendations and then make their final decision. It doesn't mean that the recommendations are implemented the way they can come out of the community of practice, but it's at least a voice of around 50 people from different geographies who have been thinking about open source AI and AI DPGs for over a year now. And what I would like to do is to basically give you an introduction to the recommendations before I turn it over to Mark, who can then give you also some practical examples of open source and AI DPG development in Kenya. So let's quickly look at the recommendations of the community of practice. And these recommendations basically build on two things. One is the last version of the draft definition for open source AI that is coming out of the OSI process, which I mentioned from the open source initiative. They are running this participatory process since over a year to define open source AI. And then there are other organizations such as the Linux Foundation as well, who also develop modelness openness frameworks. So everything that you see here highlighted in green, that is coming directly from the OSI definition, which is also the foundation for open source software, which we use as a definition for the Digital Public Goods Alliance. So just looking quickly at code, I think that's quite straightforward, actually. We have several components that the definition from OSI marks as mandatory. So code for pre-processing data, code used for training, validation, and testing, supporting libraries, and inference code. And then there are some code components that the encourage to be open, basically. So code used to perform inference from benchmark tests, for instance, and evaluation code. And if you want to be really comprehensive, there are also other code pieces that could be relevant for recreating an AI system. And as with open source software code, this code needs to be provided on an OSI approved license, and documentation should be made available under open, permissive Creative Commons license. So, and these changes will be reflected in the DPG indicator on open licenses, of course, and in the DPG indicator on documentation requirements. So I think that's quite straightforward. Let's look at the model. There, the OSI definition says that model parameters should be made mandatorily open, including trained weights and model architecture. Again, model architecture is a form of code, so this should be made available under an open OSI approved license. Model parameters should be made available under terms conforming to the open source definition. And then as a COP, we also recommend as a mandatory requirement documentation, which is a model assistance card, which gives you more information about the intended use of the model, about the limits of the models, how the model was developed, some aspects around responsible model development, and so on and so forth. And we are currently developing a template for this. So when you look at the model part, that's also quite straightforward, I would say. There's an open question regarding the legal applicability of copyright law to trained weights, and therefore OSI says that you need terms conforming to the open source definition, because it's not clear if open source licenses are applicable at all to open weights, but this is expected to be updated when legal clarity was established, and there are court cases going on around this. Then let's take a look at the data component. And if you followed a little bit the open source AI discussion, then you might know that this is the most contested issue. So how much information, how much open data is required for an AI model or an AI system to be considered open source? And the draft definition of the open source initiative currently states that they require data information as a mandatory component, but there you can choose. And they have a list of components here in decreasing order of importance, which you can provide in order to be recognized as an open source AI model if you comply with the other provisions as well. And this could include either data sets, a research paper, a technical report, or a data card. And from the COP's perspective, you would always require a data card because we also want to capture additional information, such as provenance information of data sets, scope and characteristics, but also aspects related to responsible data collection and rationales for obtaining and selecting data, including labeling as well, for instance, and data cleaning methodologies. According to the OSI definition, there are also components that are encouraged, which include evaluation metrics, for instance, and results. And of course, there are additional data sets, validation data sets, and benchmarking data sets if you want to have the complete picture, which would be nice to have as well. And as a COP, we also put forward to encourage, of course, the original training data set. So open data is always the gold standard that we would like to see. representative data samples if you can't share the full data set, synthetic data modeled on original training and testing data sets. But here I have to say that this is quite niche and also quite expensive, so it's not applicable to all contexts. Or gated access to original training and testing data sets, including a description of the process to gain access to these data sets. So you see, it's really about transparency. We want to understand which data was used to train and test a model. And yeah, as I said, the OSI draft definition checklist includes open data as the most important component. However, you could also have open source AI without open data, because there are other components that would do the job as well. And at the DBG Standard Council, we are still debating whether open data sets should be made mandatory for the DBG standard or not. There are good reasons against it. And I mean, OSI landed at this definition where you have not a hard mandatory requirement for open data, but there are also good reasons perhaps why you should include open data as a mandatory provision. And again, these changes will be reflected in indicator number 2, open licenses, and indicator 5, with data cards being mandatory for documentation in our field. So lastly, of course, and I think that's quite interesting as well to the community here, is how do we deal with responsible AI development? Of course, it's one part to look at the technical components of what constitutes open source AI, but then we also want to make sure that AI systems are developed responsibly and ethically. So firstly, the community of practice put forward to include a mandatory estimation of the CO2 footprint caused by AI model development, to also include the sustainability dimension of AI development in the DBG standard. And then several aspects related to responsible AI documentation, so that developers must provide evidence that the model was tested for bias and fairness, and aspects such as security and resilience, and that appropriate mitigation measures were also taken. So if you want to document this can include, for instance, AI risk assessment results for the use case for which a model was submitted, or audit and assessment results. And then, of course, developers should also document around model explainability measures and how human oversight and redress mechanisms work in the model. That's a recommendation, at least from our community of practice. And there are also other parts that are non-mandatory. And again, this also comes from the OSI definition, a technical report, a research paper, usage documentation. So for instance, responsible use guidelines is something that some model developers make use of to guide the community in how to use a model responsibly, and other supporting tools. And here, of course, from a DBG perspective, the devil lies in the detail, because what we do at the DBGA is not observing deployment of any of these DBGs. We look at the design and development phase. So what we include here for responsible AI also must be relevant for the design and development phase, but we can't possibly track how an open source AI system is used for downstream implementation. So in these considerations, as you can see, are quite broad, and several indicators touch upon responsibility and do no harm. So we probably will include guiding questions around these aspects in several indicators, including documentation. And there, the model cards and data sheets and data cards will play a big role. We have an indicator specifically on privacy and other applicable laws, where we will include additional questions for AI systems. We have an indicator on open standards and best practices, where we can include mandatory and recommended best practices, for instance, for how to document data provenance, and how to make accessible results of auditing tools. And of course, indicator number 9, to do no harm by design indicator, also has a specific section on data privacy and security. And there we will add additional questions as well for the AI DPG category. So what do we need going forward? I think there are a couple of things, some specific to the digital public goods space and some more specific to the general AI space, I would say. What we really struggle with is that there are a lot of different tools and frameworks out there for responsible AI governance. So it would be great to have some form of convergence around what is a suitable framework for audits and risk and impact assessments. And I mean, of course, you can also develop your own risk assessment and or auditing tool specific to your context, but it actually also would be nice to build an industry standards from our perspective. We also need to establish benchmarks for documentation requirements. So especially if we don't require open data, we need to understand what good enough data information actually contains. So when is the data card or data sheet filled out well enough, so to say, and provides enough information? We also want to test these recommendations before they are adopted by the DBG Standard Council and map open questions. So that is currently in process. So for instance, question around fine-tuned models and platform independence, that's on our mind as well. And then from a broader perspective, I think what we need going forward is a more nuanced understanding of AI risks. And this, of course, pertains to open source AI as well as to proprietary AI models and accelerated AI safety research to increase robustness of systems. And lastly, it would be great to find consensus on the open source AI definition to move beyond this confusion and open washing that the term sometimes entails as well. And with this, I will hand back to Julia, who is going to introduce Mark, I believe, for some practical examples.
Thank you so much, Lea. We had some opinions about the last point in the chat as well, so maybe we have a moment later to talk a little bit about that. But yeah, like you said, with no further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mark so that we have enough time later for questions as well. Thank you, Mark, and go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Mark Irura, as you've heard. I'm working with GIZ Fairford based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'll be talking to you a little bit about some of our work in country and what our thoughts have been with regards to it, like fitting into the broader conversation about digital public goods in AI. So Lea has done a bit of a background, and I don't want to go back to that. So I will skip one slide. And I will come to this slide. And I wanted to start with this conversation here and focus a little bit about why it matters. So from a country perspective, and I'll take the lens of government, one of the things that you would find across governments, I'll give an example of Kenya, is there has been expertise that has been built over a number of years to maintain particular systems. So for example, if I think about Kenya's IFMIS, the journey to digitize and manage the financial information management system at the National Treasury started around 2008. Of course, earlier there have been like either manual or semi-manual processes, but now specific to digitization. So capacities have been built over time. So one of the things that I remember whilst working in government is how do we leverage off expertise that exists in the team when procuring or getting vendors to supply solutions? So this is a big issue, I think, that will become apparent, especially when procurement of AI solutions begins to happen, because they're very data intensive. And also, I think because they are data intensive, if you go in one direction, it might become harder to roll back because a lot has already been invested. You can imagine IFMIS since 2008, and now the kind of extensions that have been done, the kind of training or the kind of things that have changed with the Act or the Public Finance Act changing and with the demands changing as time goes on. So this slide is really to be critical about when the government is going to make a choice on a particular infrastructure. Will it be maintained for the next 10, 20 years? Will those companies who provide these services exist? And that's why we really talk about open source, because then when they are maintained by a community, I think there has been more longevity, not to say that no commercial products have sprung from open source. And this was also a consideration for us when you were thinking about doing a chatbot with government. So I'll skip that. It's already been covered. And I want to talk about this a little bit. So this is a technology stack. Sorry to be a little bit technical for those of us who are techies. We recognize Linux as an open operating system. We could recognize Postgres as a database that is also open. And also we would recognize JBoss, which later became WildFly. It's middleware for a three-tier. A three-tier is like a web application. So it runs on a database in an operating system with the code put in a container. This container is called a web server. So this is WildFly. And we have commercial flavors of this. So on my right, I have commercial flavors of WildFly, the servlet container, which would be Red Hat, which is a commercial application. The same with the database level that I've shared, and then also with these are flavors of Linux, but which are proprietary. And so I think this conversation is important. It's technical, but it is important when decisions are being made on which technology stack to apply. And this is also something that we had to do when you're thinking about the total cost of ownership. If we are building a chatbot for the government, for example, or an AI solution, what's the total cost of ownership? Will they pay recurrent licenses for a web server or a database, for example? Does government have the capacity to continue to do that? Or do we then build the capacity to adopt? I remember in the tax authority once, there was applications that were migrated to a Postgres database. And really, the capacity had to be built around it so that this could continue to be maintained, but also the data could coexist with other systems in government. So when we are thinking about this investment, it's not just, over the 2-year cycle where we think technology becomes obsolete, but we also think about it a little bit longer term. So I'm now diving into the case study. So we have implemented an AI-based conversational chatbot with the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner in Kenya. So this request came about as they wanted to onboard more data controllers and processors, and they wanted to also educate citizens about their rights. So it's conversational, it's informational, it's not transactional. So by transactional, I mean you can't pull data from the system, or you can't query like a particular record from the agency, but rather you can ask a question and you will get a response. So when we started the journey, it was about how do we communicate in a more plain language around what the office does. What are the rights? What are your rights? What are your responsibilities as a data controller and a data processor? And what is a data controller? Who is a data controller, for example? Why are we using this term, data controller? So that is what the bot does. It explains that in understandable language, like at the basis. So these are some of the features of the bot, that we can have multiple communication channels. So like right now, it's deployed on our website, but at some point also, it was also deployed on Telegram, so it could be used on a device or on a phone. We have a dashboard that helps to track access, who has accessed, what is which devices are more commonly used, what time of the day, and also to track if the bot is answering questions correctly or it is failing in some way. And when it fails in some way, then we have a way that we graciously degrade. And by graciously degrade is we have a knowledge base, and I'll talk about it in a little while. We have a knowledge base that has been created by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. The knowledge base is based on the Act and the regulations that they have developed. So if the bot does not map question to an intent, or rather if it's not able to classify the question and understand what you're asking, you should say, I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question. Kindly rephrase it or ask it again. Because one of the challenges as well has been like proofs that can pull domains of knowledge from other sources, or just from a model that it has been trained on. It creates a certain risk for government because a response might be given which the government is not comfortable with. So we also deployed an annotation tool. An annotation tool is just something that is used to say, okay, we are happy with the response that has been given, or we are not happy, or particularly after this particular incident, or the act was read, or the finance bill has just been read, then people are asking a particular kind of question. So it's a simpler way to retrain the chatbot. And then the nice one, or the interesting one, is like the bot can support English and Swahili. And also Sheng is spoken here as a mixture of English and Swahili. But then, of course, it would be nice if the government could respond in Sheng, but we just use English and Swahili as the official languages. And then, of course, the technology stack is open source. So I talked a little bit about the knowledge base. So the knowledge base really was derived by creating training data that was generated by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, like their compliance unit, their enforcement unit. So, but we also had to do some work to kind of create variations of words. It's called embeddings. So we pulled a Swahili data set from Mozilla Common Voice. Common Voice is a platform that people volunteer both voice and text, and it's been developed by the Mozilla Foundation. You can have a look at it. So we trained it with the Swahili there so that we reduce the chances of it's not able to understand a vocabulary that you have put it in, because the technology stack is built on the RASA framework. I'll also talk about it a little bit towards the end. So we use a classifier in RASA. And so this bot has to just pull knowledge from the knowledge base it has been trained on. So you will see in the second bullet where it says the responses are crafted to align with ODPC's policies so that it delivers an accurate and compliant information to the users. So the point there also is when we're thinking about such an information bot being situated in government, there might be some level of risk if it was so generative, unless we get it right from how it is trained and we agree on the parameters, because like we do not want something that can spew out information from a source that it has not been trained on. So this slide is just to highlight a couple of things that are related to the bot. It's geeky. But we have a text classifier as part of the bot. And we also first begin with, do we understand the question that you are asking? And do we understand in what language you've given it to us? So that then we can do a classification. We can retrieve information that we have in our, what we call a vector database, and then we can give a response. So when we're giving a response, we have to craft it in a way that the government is comfortable to give that response, or in this case, it's the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So these are just examples, right? We were heavy on a human-centered design approach because people will not say, I want to report a case. The question will typically be, I want to complain, or I have a complaint, or I've been hacked, something similar, right? And then they will not ask, what are the rights of a data subject? They will typically ask, like, can I not share my data, for example? So we had to do a lot of training and capacity building. And then this goes to the first point when I was talking about a DPG approach. And with a DPG approach, the thing we ask ourselves is, what is the longevity of the skills and knowledge that you're passing, such that, for example, the staff and the officers at the ODPC can continue to train and work with the bots, even when, you know, the project has come to an end, or are these skills transferable? Knowing also in government, sometimes when you come with new ideas and new things, there's a lot of change management required because like people's job descriptions and roles can change. So those are some of the things that we also think about when we think about like a more holistic approach. This is just a slight showcase of natural language understanding, for example. So if we say hi, you know, you will get this response. And then if I ask it in Sheng, I will say Niaje, it will switch from English and it will go to Swahili, and it says, here it's just saying in Swahili that I don't understand Niaje. Niaje is a popular slang greeting in Sheng. And then it's just asked me to rephrase my question. So I think because of time, I want to pause there. The rest of the things that I wanted to say are kind of a little bit geeky, but this is the URL of where the bot is. It's not perfect, but it works. And you can interrogate a little bit more. So I want to stop sharing and hand it back to Julia. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much to you both for the really interesting insights. We saw a lot of questions coming in to the chat as well. So it seems that a lot of it has resonated and left some open questions for people. I want to give also the opportunity just to ask questions out loud. It's always nicer to have people speak up. Obviously, keep it short because we do have quite a lot of questions to go through. Maybe not to put you on the spot, but Minu from UNICEF, you had a question on kind of the strategic, like the government aspect. Maybe if you would like, you can come in with your question.
Sure, Julia, thank you so much. Just checking, can you hear me?
Yep, that works.
Thanks so much, Julia. And first of all, Lea and Mark, what a pleasant presentation from you both. Congratulations. And thank you so much for sharing. Also, on behalf of the entire people in this group, we appreciate you all bringing us together. So thank you so much for that as well. My name is Minu. I'm in the Western Central Africa Regional Office covering 24 countries. Most of the time, we do get a lot of requests from the government saying, hey, look, we're about to do AI strategy in maybe digital transformation, maybe in education, come what may. But then they say, but we don't have capacity for this one. So how can you support? That's the first question we get. And this kind of questions or the requests have increased in the last 2 years rapidly for many different reasons. For example, as UNICEF, we do have a supporting mechanism, but quite frankly, we can't even support all the countries all the time. So my question is to the DPI and DPG team, what mechanisms are in place? Is there an SOS button the government can press? Is there a form they can fill in? What is the support mechanism? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I can provide maybe a quick answer to this. And I wish there was an SOS button or something like this. Unfortunately, there's not. From the DPGA's end, we don't provide direct technical assistance. What we do is we are a convener. We bring together people who face similar challenges and together with solution providers, so to say, to exchange on potential remedies. We also produce knowledge products. On AI specifically, we haven't done tons of that yet because the open source AI definition and the AI DPG definition is still in the making, so to say. But we always can try to connect you to other people working in the field and doing exactly what is requested. I think Mark is actually in a better position working for GIZ to provide actual technical assistance than we are.
Great, thank you so much. And yeah, thank you, Minu, for asking that question. I actually, throughout the different, there were a few questions asking about what it is that the UN does, working on AI, how the different entities work with each other. And I just want to say that you can find a lot of the work that's already been done by the different entities, innovation and digital teams, on AI on our library of use cases. The Digital Resource Hub is only internal, but we also have an external living library of just publications and use cases that are publicly available on the UN website. We'll make sure to put that in the chat as well. Yeah, also I want to add that all of the work that the UN is doing in general, if you're interested in learning more about that, it might be interesting for you to follow the upcoming UN General Assembly that's happening this month, because there's going to be a Summit of the Future there that also includes an agreement on digital. And we will be sharing an overview of the different side events that are happening there. And there will definitely be conversations about AI within the UN system that might be interesting to some of you that have asked or like that question, these different questions coming in. Let's maybe look to a more specific one that's rated quite highly as well, from Anupam, who asked Lea, I assume, or both, how we can ensure the quality of AI metadata as per the FAIR principles to ensure that the outcomes are kind of like of high quality, and what the biggest challenges are when it comes to security aspects.
Yeah, in terms of the FAIR principles, that is something that we can, for instance, reference to in the DPG standard and as a best practice indicator. We might include something like this as well in the documentation part, because there's also a data provenance standard that touches upon some of these questions, specifically for AI training data, and that is part of the documentation requirements that we can put forward. So there are several mechanisms that we have through the DPG standard to refer to such principles, either through mandatory requirements or through recommendations, so to say. In terms of key challenges or security aspects, I'm not sure what inner space and outer space means, but I mean, obviously, when it comes to data, there are several considerations that you need to make. The first is, of course, do you have the legal rights to share the data if you intend to share data? That can pertain to copyright, of course. This can also pertain to privacy considerations, which is another aspect which I think is quite essential. What we at the DPGA don't want to do is to encourage unsafe disclosure of data. Whenever you are sharing data, it's important to make sure that there is no PII data in it or sensitive data regarding categories such as race, for instance, political views, etc. And that, of course, comes with additional requirements in terms of how you process data, how you make data available through anonymization, for instance, and other means. So that's actually not an easy part. And as I alluded to, the open data or data information requirement, depending on how you see it, is one of the most challenging one when it comes to the open source AI definition and also the implementation through the DBG standard.
Thank you very much. There's yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. I also wanted to add a little bit of that, and it was in Leah's slide on AI safety research. So I think from the question on how can we ensure quality, I think one of the things that is important is an intentionality and a deliberateness around, even when you're talking about AI use cases, do we have expertise in the countries when these are being deployed to have people who can actually look at optimization, what that means, versus rewarding a model? Because I think one of the challenges that's there is like models can deceive. So I think AI safety researchers are very expensive resources. And also like in the work that we, I suppose most of us are working within development work, to hire these resources is very expensive. So we need more of them, and we need to have an intentionality, a deliberateness around creating, this talent and having it, especially in the global South. Thanks.
Thank you. There's actually another question about your project in here that talks about how many languages are actually supported by the chatbot. In case that hasn't been addressed, maybe you can speak on that.
So for now, it's just English, Swahili, and Sheng. Sheng is like a mixture of English and Swahili, but we will respond in English or Swahili. But we have other work that have not highlighted in this use case. Like we're working with farmers outside Nairobi, and we are targeting like Kikuyu, Kiambu, and like 2 other more languages, which farmers would like typically access. Yes, thanks.
Thank you. I have another question that was rated highly. Sergio, if you'd like to ask a question, I have unmuted your microphone. If you would like, we can have. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Julia. And yeah, it's pretty short. And I was wondering to which extent UN agencies should or must use digital public good instead of proprietary goods. We are probably approached all the time by proprietary digital goods companies, and they have resources, and they help much more than just the use of the digital goods. So I was just wondering that. Thank you.
There is no mandatory requirement to use DBGs if you're working with a UN system. Obviously, there's a commitment through the UN to support DBG development and use. I want to say that several UN organizations are part of the Digital Public Goods Alliance, who are in the DPGA's board, UNICEF and UNDP. We have FAO as another member. We have one member that's going to announce in October their membership, and another one in the pipeline from the UN. So there's quite a big commitment throughout the UN system for the DBG agenda. And I want to say that some of these organizations have, for instance, a DBG first policy where they first assess if a DBG can do the job, basically for what they would like to procure. And if that's not the case, then they would revert to a proprietary solution. I think what needs to be considered is that, of course, DPG use requires different different skills from a team and different procurement policies, for instance, as well, because you don't procure a license, for instance, for a product. You would procure these additional services to make this product fit within an already existing architecture, for instance, to adopt it for a specific context, etc. pp. So of course there's other work, I would say other work involved than using proprietary solutions, but of course you're much more flexible. You don't have vendor lock-in. If you're unhappy with the service provider, you can change it, etc. And the best case scenario, also strengthening local economic ecosystems, because you can rely on a local company that is helping you adopt a DPG. So I think there are many advantages. Of course, it also comes at a cost in terms of that, as I said, you need to look at procurement policies and supporting structures. But that's something that organizations that apply such a DPG first, the open source policy, what they have in mind, and it means to create the additional supporting structure within. So for instance, have appropriate requests for proposals handy that are applicable to open source as well in DPGs. And that is actually stuff we can help quite a bit with, because we are in conversations with countries who are implementing or developing open source policies. And the same goes, as I said, for some organizations that have DPG first policies. So if you want to know more about that, I'm happy to share more via email or in a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I fear that we don't have enough time to go into all the other open questions, but thank you so much for the presentations, Lea and Mark, for all your engaged questions, and also in the chat. We saw a lot of sharing of perspectives, a lot of insight shared there as well, which is great to see. I'm just gonna give a quick kind of like disclaimer for the UN colleagues. You have seen shared like a lot of the different internal resources we have. Please also just feel free to reach out to us via digital@un.org if you would like to know in what way your organization is already involved. If you'd like to get more involved, it always helps to have people to connect with from the different UN entities in order to make sure that this is the forum that helps colleague kind of connect on digital. So yeah, like Johanna just kindly put in the chat, digital@un.org is how to reach us. And with that, just like a final thank you to our speakers. It was great having you, and thank you all for your attention and participation.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for the great questions. And if you need anything, I'm reachable at lea@digitalpublicgoods.net.
Awesome.
Thank you so much as well for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day, everyone, and hopefully see you soon.
Yes, take care.
Bye.
Bye.